Our next speaker is Dilip Hero. He is a writer, journalist, and commentator. He has published 34 books and contributed to another 18. He is the editor of the Baburnama, Journal of the Emperor Babur, a world classic. It's preserved since 1530. He's also written scripts for theatre, television, drama, and cinema. But of course, he has in front of him, which you might like to see, which could be appropriate after this, and his latest book is a comprehensive dictionary of the Middle East. So there might be a quiz afterwards. So Dilip, as I've said, we've heard, and you've heard what we've heard so far, and now you've got another perspective, regional, historical, and from inside Syria. So do go ahead and tell us what you want to share with us.
Thank you. I think the title of my presentation says Learning from History and Solutions. So I will stick with the historical perspective and talking, of course, in a way Rita gave away the secrets. Personal history, I have done more than 30 books. More than half of these are on Middle East and Islamic affairs. And of course you see the dictionary. Now in this particular dictionary, and you have to recognize this is, okay. In this particular dictionary, and you have to excuse this commercial, this is a commercial, there is an entry on the Lebanese Civil War. Now the Lebanese Civil War, which Lebanon is next door to Syria, started in April 1975 and ended in October 1990, 15 and a half years. So I'll give a brief history of the Lebanese Civil War and then see what lessons we can draw from there. Now during that particular 15 and a half year history, different foreign countries intervened, and most of them got tired and fed up and left. Only two countries which were next door, Syria and Israel, stayed on. So basically what one has to understand, in any civil war, either civil war gets started because the neighboring countries have interest to ignite something, or once civil war gets going, then neighboring countries intervene. So in the case of Lebanese civil war, the countries which got involved at one time or the other, Egypt, Syria, and USA, Britain, France, and Italy. Israel attacked Lebanon twice. In 1978, southern Lebanon, and in 1982 they went all over to Beirut and expelled the PLO fighters. And at that time, something multinational force came in, and that had Britain, France, and Italy as well, and of course America. And when there was a car bomb which killed 241 US Marines, and another bomb which killed 59 French soldiers, then the Western countries withdrew. So you can see that there's a history in terms of foreign involvement, and then you can see how it ends. Ultimately, the two countries, as I said earlier, they stayed on because they had a very direct input, Syria. Now Syria, of course, very quickly, Syria has always treated Lebanon as a younger sister, and until 4 or 5 years ago, there was no Syrian embassy in Beirut. You had to go to the border and they will give you a visa there. So that explains Syrian involvement. And then Israel, of course, wanted to have its own proxy regime in Lebanon, so they directly went in and they did proper invasions until 1982, 78. So again, quite simply, in those 15 and a half years, the Lebanese civil war went through 9 phases. Now, I don't think I'm going to give you the 9 phases. You will find them in my dictionary. So you see, and each phase has a very important input, and finally how resolution came about. I'll give you the resolution. Resolution came about because Iraqi troops moved into Kuwait, and there was a UN resolution to expel them, and the USA under George Bush Sr. gave the lead. And in those days, Syrian leader Hafiz Assad, he agreed to send 2 divisions of Syrian troops to work under the Pentagon to expel the Iraqis from Kuwait. And at that point, the deal was that Assad is going to move into Lebanon and expel the right-wing Christian mini-state which had been set up, and Israel will not intervene. And that's what happened. That's why before the January-February 1991 Gulf War, led by Bush Sr., in October 1990, that thing came together. Now, the reason I'm giving this detail, because I will show you the possible scenario which is likely to happen in Syria. Now, we go back again on Syria, and I'm sorry, you have to excuse me because history means broad brush. So I will give you the broad brush, okay? Syria, to understand Syria, there are 3 levels of Syria. First is the domestic level, regional level, and global level. Domestically, and again I give you the round figures, 70% of people in Syria are Sunni Arabs, and the 30% are non-Sunni Arabs, which includes Alawis, who are part of Shia Islam, which includes Christians, who are 10% of the population, and the Kurds, who are ethnically different. So those 30%, generally speaking, go with whatever they have now, because they have a secular state run by Bashar al-Assad, and they don't know what will happen if Assad is kicked out. Therefore, they are supporting him. That's one. Secondly, remember something. To understand what's happening in the Middle East, the Arab Spring, and again I have to tell you, there's the entry on the Arab Spring in my dictionary, 3,000 words. Okay, now, Arab Spring takes 3 main countries. Forget about Libya, because Libya was basically NATO military campaign which got rid of Gaddafi. 3 countries, each of them has followed a different path. In Egypt, mainly counter-revolution. Generals are back again. In Yemen, because the army was divided, so it's a mixed situation. In Syria, army is completely behind Assad. The reason is this, that even though Alawis are 12 to 13% of the population, within the military, amongst the professional soldiers, because there's a conscription, 70% are Alawis. So they know that if Assad goes, they are going to be slaughtered, because they are Alawis, they are Shia Islam, and therefore they are fighting not only for Assad, they are fighting for their own life. That's the main reason why the military in Syria has stayed completely behind Assad. See, and that's the way to understand the whole mechanics of it. So I gave you the domestic situation, and I gave you the understanding that even though Alawis are 12% population in the military and also amongst the officers, intelligence officers, they are mostly Alawites. They are part of Shia Islam. So that's one. Then I come to the regional part. Regionally, of course, we all know that Iran and Iraq are supporting Assad, and on the other side, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. They are supporting the other guys. Okay, so now Iran and Iraq, of course, Iraq is next door to Syria, and Iran, of course, is a Shia country, etc., etc. Now, they are supporting him because they say, and remember one thing, in the Middle East, Syria has been the only country which never came up in the orbit of USA. It was either Soviet, friends of Soviets, and after Soviet Union with Russia. So therefore, unlike in Yemen, which was basically under the orbit of America and Saudi Arabia, things were patched up. But in Syria, America has no input. And Syria, and of course Soviet Union before, and now Russia, of course, together. Okay, so that is the way to understand why Assad has gone on for so long. And regionally, Saudis, they have a lot of money. You got a problem? Throw money at it. Throw money at it. You know, there's a lot of, they write checks. They're very good in writing checks, you see. Now, the main thing they don't understand, and I'm not going to give them a tutorial, they will pay me a good fee for that. You don't achieve things because you only have money. You need good intelligence. About that, you need strategic vision. You must have vision. You know, what do we want in 10 years, in 15 years, 20 years? What does Saudi Arabia want? They have no idea. So therefore, they fall back on the, primeval position. They are Sunnis. They are Shia. We are Sunnis. And Shia are the heretic. So therefore, the Saudis are pushing the whole thing against Assad because he is a Shia. And that really is creating the fault line not only in the Middle East, but all over, into Afghanistan, into Pakistan, and so on. It's a very dangerous thing to do, but because the Saudis do not have strategic thinkers, they don't have think tanks, and of course they can hire people, but they can't think for them. And so therefore what's happening is that regionally, Saudi Arabia is trying to turn the whole thing into Shia-Sunni business, whereas Iran and they are going with the idea that this is the anti-Israeli or anti-Zionist front and we must keep it intact. That's one. Now the more important thing, which is my basic point, is that Syria is no longer a civil war. Syria has become a proxy war between major powers. Major powers meaning Russia. Of course, China always goes with Russia. It doesn't want to be active, but we can see the division in the Security Council, USA, France, and Britain, and on the other side, Russia and China. So you see, this has become on a global scale, it's a fight between major powers. And on that particular point, one has to remember that we are no longer living in a unipolar world of USA. And I can tell you, the birth of a multipolar world happened on, very easy to write down, 080808. What is that? 8 August 2008. On 7th of August 2008, Georgian president went in and he tried to pull back the two enclaves, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, back into Georgia, and he used force. And Russia under Putin, he was the prime minister, said, no way, we will not allow it. And they went in a big way. They recognized South Ossetia and Abkhazia as the independent countries, and they helped them, and they went into Georgia. And at that point, George W. Bush, he was in Beijing Olympics, and so was Mr. Putin. And I have to read you this quote. On the 7th of August it happened, and George W. Bush said, this is, you have to bear with me, it's his exact words, George W. Bush Jr., bullying and intimidation are not acceptable ways to conduct foreign policy in the 21st century. having invaded Iraq, on cooked up evidence, so-called evidence, he is saying this. Now don't laugh. Please read the part of the speech that Barack Obama gave 2 days ago, in Brussels, 2,000 people before him, where he said, such and such a thing is not possible in 21st century. So 21st century is one, the other cliche is this one, on the wrong side of history. If you're not following USA, you're on the wrong side of history. So you see, this has become a cliche. now, the point is this, I come to the latest news. What happened? On that particular day, this is what he said, but the irony of the statement was lost on him. This actually is extract from another book called After Empire, but never mind, I won't show you that book. In any case, his administration did not go beyond verbal condemnation of Russia's overwhelming military response to Georgia's attempt to regain control of the breakaway provinces of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and that when multipolar world was born on 080808, 8th of August. Now, what has Mr. Putin done in Crimea? He's raising the profile of multipolar world. what we have to understand is that America, though it has 14 aircraft carriers and can go anywhere, is no longer the one to have its own say. There are other countries which have a check and balance on America, and they have succeeded. I gave you example of Putin, I gave you example of Crimea. Of course, now the oligarchs or the buddies of Putin won't be able to do the shopping in Harrods. Bad news, very bad news. We should have tears coming out. So that means that has been accepted. That's one. See, that no longer America, and there, what is the multipolar world? Multipolar world is not a new concept. Here again, I have to indulge in history. Multipolar world in Europe came about after 1815. In 1815, as you know, Napoleon went all over. You know, he wanted to conquer all of Europe, and then he was stopped. And after Napoleon, 6 major powers in Europe said, we will never allow another leader to try to conquer all of Europe. The countries were Britain, France, Germany, Spain, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Tsarist War, and Ottomans. So they had an understanding that if any one of us tries to become superpower, become the only sole leader, we will check and balance it. And that particular checks and balances in terms of major powers in Europe worked from 1815 to 1914. And then it broke down. So once again, we have already entered multipolar world, and you can see, if you look now at the behavior of Putin, you can see there's a particular logic behind it, and he is consolidating that multipolar world. That's one. Secondly, now I come to what are the solutions? How is this thing going to solve itself? Now, one has to understand that unlike George W. Bush, who knew how to shoot first and then ask questions, Barack Obama is a highly intelligent man. He is an intellectual. He was a professor of constitutional law in Chicago University. And he has a historical perspective. He understands that America can no longer have its own say. That's why, for example, in Libya, he said, no, we will not go one. You, Britain, you want to go first, and then when you run out of ammunition, we'll give you that, but we are not going in ourselves. He understands that, and he did that. When it came to specifically about Syria and surgical strikes, what did he say? Of course, he followed what happened in British Parliament. I will ask Congress. And when they did the nose count, they found 2/3 of congressmen and women were not prepared to give him an okay to have the surgical strikes. So and at that time came bad old bear riding a horse, Putin. Chemical weapons can be destroyed. So he grabbed it. So the same thing applies here. Under no circumstances the USA is going to get militarily involved in Syria. Other main reason, Americans are war weary. They had 2 bad wars, and Afghanistan is still going on, and they no longer want to go into foreign countries and do all this thing. And Obama understands that. If you read his interview that he gave to Atlantic Monthly, where he openly said, we had 3 wars in Muslim countries, and we don't want the 4th war, and so therefore he's not going to go into this thing, and that that doesn't mean that one should not resist any chance of this gung-ho intervention, but that's not going to happen for the reasons I explained. And the second reason is that opposition against Assad is divided. There are, shall we say, good guys, they want democratic, blah, blah, blah. Others are the gung-ho jihadis, and they are better fighters, they fight very strongly. So if at all USA or Western countries get involved, what do you find? They will be partly fighting alongside the jihadis, partly. So see, so that particular logic, or shall I say illogic, explains to us that I don't think there's going to be any military intervention. At the same time, how will this thing end? Yes, exhaustion. But exhaustion is not around the corner. I don't think this war will go on for at least, and here I give you the bad news. I know we all believe in peaceful ways and non-violence. I think this war will go on for at least 2 to 5 years, because they are not exhausted. The Syrian Assad thinks he can get in, the other guys think they can get in, you know, get rid of him, and so this will go on, and I'm afraid maybe we will have another conference next year. Thank you.